Never mind, I found it.
Nobody's watching you, so it was just my face.
Now are we ready?
I am rolling, so.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So I don't know about you, but I am glad that the Idaho State Legislative session is over. It has been a little disappointing. They did try to make it so we couldn't put initiatives on the ballot by making it so incredibly difficult that we'd never be able to get them on there without a lot of special interest money, but we managed to beat that back. So thank you to everybody who helped with the phone calls, with the emails, and everything else to the governor to get that vetoed. So everybody give yourselves a round of applause. Also, thank you to everybody who worked so hard on the Medicaid expansion. The leadership of Reclaim Idaho was amazing on this, and Reclaim Idaho is not going anywhere, so keep paying attention. If you're interested in being a part of Reclaim Idaho and keeping up with what's going on there, Claudia Pine is somebody to keep in contact with because they will be working on other issues. Now, hooray, we did get good grief. Excuse me.
Not bad, drink, lady.
I could use a drink. Now, we did get Medicaid expansion passed, so yay for that. There are work requirements. There are some restrictions that are going to make it more expensive and more difficult to implement, so that is unfortunate. But with some effort next legislative session, maybe we can undo some of that. We'll see. So, couple things. First of all, tonight at 5 p.m. in the Friendship Garden, our friend John Radford, yay John, has organized an inclusive community rally. So this is an aspirational and uplifting event meant to bring us together and also to present an alternative narrative to the one of fear and division that we so often hear in our world today. So this is going to be a great event. Please brave the storm. If you haven't had enough pizza this afternoon, there will be pizza tonight at the rally. So come and have pizza for all your meals today. It'll be great. Another thing to keep in mind is on Tuesday is the Bonneville County Democrats Central Committee meeting. If you're interested in seeing how the sausage is made, come on out. We also are going to be looking for members of committees, so please come on out to that. It will be at 7 p.m. at the library. And then another thing to please keep in mind is the Truman Banquet is coming up on May 4th. We will be having it at the Downtown Event Center on Park Street, the deck. If you would like to buy tickets today, John and Pat are back there in the back. Please wave, John and Pat. Yay! They are equipped to take your money. So please, if you want to buy your Truman Banquet tickets, let them know. You can buy them today if you would like, but they're also available online. So make sure that you're doing that. If you would like to help with the final planning stages, talk to Pat. Yes, Pat.
After the meeting, we're going to have a short meeting with all the volunteers for the Truman Banquet to assign tasks.
Okay, yes. So if you would like to help plan the Truman Banquet, help us with those final tasks as we careen toward the event, meet with us afterward with Pat, and we'll kind of do an update on that and assign tasks to people who would like to help out. So I think that's it for right now. So please keep those items in mind. So today we are going to be hearing from people who have run for office and who have held office at different levels of the government. Now, it's very important. Our citizenship demands that we be involved and that we be engaged. It is our job as voters and as citizens to provide oversight to our government. And even though in our country we haven't always lived up to the lofty ideals that we see in our founding documents, as we have progressed over the last couple of centuries, we have become a more inclusive government that represents more people and where more people can be involved at all levels. And so it's very important that we recognize that, and that as citizens, no matter party, no matter what party we are, but as citizens, that we are engaged and involved in our government and in our communities. So I've invited some people to share with us what they do, what they've done when they have held these elected positions. We will start with John Radford, who is an Idaho Falls City Councilman. He also ran for state office. So he will tell us a little bit about what it's like to serve on the city council, what you need to do. We will also have Jerry Shively. He has served on a school board. He will tell us what it's like to serve on a school board. What do school board members do? He will also talk to us about state office because he has served in the state legislature. So he'll also talk a little bit about that. We also have Bob Henage from Teton County. He drove all the way down here today to be with us. And he will be talking to us about serving on a county commission and what it takes and what that entails. So at all levels of government, it is important for us to be involved. On the back table, you will see there are a couple handouts. They include the offices that are going to be up for election this year, as well as an election calendar with dates that you need to have your paperwork submitted by, and what you need to know about getting everything turned in. There are also sign-in sheets coming around. Go ahead and sign that in. If you are interested in running for office, let me know, and let me know what office you're interested in running for. If you're interested in volunteering, put a little Y in the volunteer column so that we can let you know when we'll be doing campaigns and how you can help. So, now that you're tired of listening to me talk, let's invite John Radford to come on up and talk to us a little bit about being on the city council.
All right, thanks Miranda, thanks for all the work that you do and all of you. For those of us who've been in Idaho Falls for a lot of years and called ourselves Democrats and had that label, we haven't always had this energy or a room that's full like this. And so it's been a lot of fun the last few years to see the work that Miranda and so many others have been working on. So appreciate that. So I'll start with my race for the state legislature. The state legislature is really an amazing opportunity to have impacts on education, on public health policy, and one of the things you'll find out quickly when you're a city councilman is that the state is supreme, right? So we don't get to do things in the city unless the state allows us to do that, and that's an actual principle from our Constitution. We're a Dillon's rule state, meaning we can't do something if the state doesn't say we can. We have to have rights actually given to us as a city. And that's not true across the country. Some cities, actually in the East, they predate the states, right? Some of the cities were even there before the states, and so they have broader charters where they run schools and do all kinds of things, but that's not true for us. But when I ran for the state legislature, it was two things. I wanted to make sure I could stand up and say I'm a Democrat, right? That there's people in this community that are Democrats. And because what do you hear from your friends? Oh, you're a Democrat? Do you know any others? Like, that's crazy, right? Like 30% of our votes in this county go to Democrats. That's a huge number, right? And let's be honest, Republicans only make up 40 or 50% of the population in the county. So there is this broad group that we need to get to, and if we don't stand up and call ourselves Democrats, then we'll never influence them, right? So that was my first thought when I decided, hey, it's time to run. The next thought was education was a big concern at that time, and this was before they had started the career ladder. This is, they weren't paying teachers. A teacher was getting paid $29,000 a year in 2014 when I decided to run, and they were cutting education funding every year. And so, luckily, one of the things that I think does happen when Democrats stand up and run, Republicans aren't completely, without wit, right? They understand that they could figure out that if they support education, they'd have one less thing they'd have to hear about from Democrats. And so they have done more because we've put pressure on them, right? They haven't done enough, But if we keep standing up and running and we put pressure on them, then we get things out of that. Let me just say that, I'll come back to that on the city council side too, but just realize that your voice matters, like this inclusiveness rally that I've talked about for this evening. Really not so much that I win an argument, it's that we get on the record. We get on the record that this community cares about people and about diversity, and that we care about other faiths and other lifestyles. We need to stand up and say this, because there's other people who feel it, but if we don't say it, then they don't feel like they are supported, or that they can say it either. So, but being a candidate is something everyone should do. I know I see lots of people in the room who've done this, right? There's never, when I lost in 2014, that night, it wasn't the end of the world, right? And I had such a great time meeting people, knocking on doors, and I broadened my group of friends and people I knew that supported me and cared about me. And then I got to meet new people that I cared about, supported. And then I had done something as part of my citizenship that I would love to, I wish everyone would have to do it. Because it's a great thing to have a position on a policy, to be able to articulate it, be able to decide why you got to that point. If all of our citizenry did that, we would be in a much better situation today. So I'll just start with saying there's no downside to running. Unless you're just a type A that's like, oh, I can't lose at anything. Which there are those folks, but I'll tell you, it's just a good experience largely. You're gonna get beat up. I'll tell you the best training I had to become get in the political arena was I refereed high school basketball. So I walked into that gym and I knew half of those people hated me, right? But what I got really good at was listening to the people who hated me. And it was fine to listen. And the more you listen, the better you are, right? The more you talk, the less you're listening. Richard Stallings gave me great advice when I ran for the legislature. He said, hey, when you knock on a door and you're asking for votes, the more you say, the more you're turning someone off. So listen. And if you need to correct them because they're just calling someone, they hate these groups, or if you need to correct them, you can. But most people just want to express their views, right? So listen. And then if they ask you direct questions, stand up for your policies. Stand up for what you believe. But there's a lot there where you can just listen and just find out what people care about. Because if it's really a representative form of government, then as a candidate, you need to hear, right? You need to find out what they care about. And all of us got pretty upset when Representative Zollinger and Representative Ehart weren't listening to what we wanted, right? So we should listen, right? So I will say money is an issue when you run for politics. And I will tell you, you have to ask for money, and that is a hard thing for some people, and it's not easy for anyone, I don't think. But have the confidence in yourself that you're doing something for people, and that takes resources. And a lot of people have more resources than you do, and they can give that money if they can. And then treat that money like you would anything that's sacred, right? Like you need to be careful with that money, and try to spend it in the way that's most reasonably going to help you, the party, and the state, right? Because we can raise money and lose, but hopefully we build systems. Pat's campaign, I would say, was so successful at that because we raised a lot of money, we got systems in place, we got communication directors, we got all kinds of things that this county didn't have before, or we haven't done in a while, right? So it really, running and getting resources matter for the next step, for the next person. So I'll always help. Okay, so in 2014, I lost my race and thought, well, I'll keep involved in Democratic politics. But then in 2015, we had Dee Whittier, who was on our city council. He passed away suddenly, which is a sad part of public life. I hope that its health isn't related to public service. I'm counting on it not being that one. And then I was asked to apply for that position And the mayor didn't select me; she selected David Smith. And but I was considered for that, and that's when 3 months later it came due for the calendar that we were talking about in the back. It was time to decide whether to run for city council, and I considered that. And some people came and said, "Hey, your name recognition's high after the race from in the last fall. Why don't you try?" So I put my name in early, and Idaho Falls fire chief, who had just retired, put his name in against me, Dean Ellis. And so I didn't know how that would go, particularly with the D next to my name, right? Like in the city of Idaho Falls, we do pretty well as Democrats, right? In District 33, I think we start with a pretty good number. We struggle in District 30, but the city council, it's a city election. And if you look up at the makeup of our city council now, it's a fairly progressive group. I won't call them all Democrats, right? Because some of them are, but some are just progressive Republicans, and some are just progressive in general and really don't label themselves anything. But what we've noticed in the city elections is progressive candidates are winning, and winning big. Dan Beck, who's Doyle Beck's son, ran for city council last year, 2 years ago, 2017, and he spent $30,000, raised $30,000, spent $30,000 on the race, and got 26% of the vote. Jim Freeman beat him with 60%. And Jim's a known Democrat, right?
He's independent, but he's progressive.
Yeah, well, he seems to put his name out there. He's a union member. He's been very vocal about these things. So
how much did Jim spend?
6,000, probably. But Jim Freeman's dad had been on the council, Jim Freeman's grandfather had been on the council, and his grandfather, like Freeman Park's named after their family. So he had a built-in that was helpful, but he has been involved in the city his whole life. So he had friends throughout the city. He served as a fireman his whole career, so he'd served people. Everyone knew Jim. But it just shows you, Barb Ehart ran for mayor, and she got into a runoff, and her number was 37%, right? So in the city of Idaho Falls, we know what the far Republican, the far right Republicans number is 35%, right? That's what they support. Because if you're supporting Barb Ehart, you're probably right in that far right column. And the mayor, I think she ended up at 57%. And so I think keep in mind that if you're going to run in the city or in District 33, you really aren't at the disadvantage that you think of Idaho Falls. I want to get rid of that kind of concept. And in Teton County, you guys have done a great job of, you guys have this half and half battle, and you guys have to fight every election, right?
Yeah.
Someone wins by 200 votes, and so all this work matters all the time. So on the city council, let me give you a little bit of what you can expect if you want to run or if you are interested. The city council in Idaho Falls is really something unique. I've had the opportunity to be appointed to the American Public Power Policymakers Board, and so there's 35 people nationwide who get to serve on this board, and I got to be selected because we run Idaho Falls Power in the city of Idaho Falls. So I get to go to Washington, D.C. twice a year and go up on the Hill, and we met with Senator Feinstein and all kinds of interesting folks, and that's an opportunity I wouldn't have had I not ran for the city council. The city of Idaho Falls, because we have Idaho Falls Power, we're doing our fiber pilot project. Like, if nothing else happens in the time that I'm on the city council and we walk away with 23,000 people having fiber internet to their home, then we have done something worthwhile, right? It's not that different than the roads and the sewers and the streets that happened in 1912. So the city council doesn't have education, it doesn't have, we don't really make decisions about healthcare, we don't make decisions about gun policy. There's a lot that we don't do, but there's a lot that you can get accomplished right here in Idaho Falls. And then the other thing it's given me is this opportunity like tonight. If John Radford, the citizen, had said, "Oh, David Barton, let's have a different conversation," I don't think it gets on the news, right? So we get to have a bully pulpit. We can talk about some of these issues, and I try to use that carefully and try to talk about the right things when you do that, because you don't want to be that kind of screeching voice. But we do have that opportunity on the council to bring up important issues and talk about that. So I would encourage you to come to the city council meetings, watch our live streams. We govern to empty rooms almost all the time. And and I'll be honest, there's a lot of stuff about the sewer system that you're not going to be interested in. But that's all right, because then every once in a while you get to come and decide whether we should have a fiber internet system, right? Or you get to come and find out what our new land use policies should be. Should we kind of keep our core redeveloped, or are we trying to stop, urban sprawl? All those things, we're having those conversations, and we need your voice. Parks and recreation, it's a big part of what we do. We got 21 miles of new canal trails. So we have the Iona Canal all the way into the heart of Office Park, 21 miles that we're going to have paved. We got a $1.8 million grant from the state of Idaho. So that's going to be a really amazing thing to just have a corridor along the canal banks. Office Park, the green belt, all of these things that we get to have an impact on. So with that, that's all I really have to say. Miranda, did you want me to answer questions now, or do you want?
So we were going to wait till the end for questions, but he needs to go to work. So
Yeah.
if you have questions for John,
I
now
gotta
is the
sneak
time
back
ask your questions
to the
of John.
bookstore because it's
Yeah.
Saturday.
I was just going to ask John, what was your career and educational history before you made the 2014 run decision?
That's interesting you asked that, because I have a degree in political science.
Okay.
I went back though to school to get a master's in business administration. And I was telling my wife this the other day, I don't know that I would have felt justified running, and I shouldn't have cared, but the MBA gave me a bit of confidence to say, yeah, maybe I could help. I could help with budgeting, and I could help with some of these issues. And so I don't think it matters largely, but for me, it made me feel like I had a bit more credibility. But my educational background it helps me immensely on the city. I'm in charge, my liaison assignments are budget and power. So I started off in Parks and Rec and fire. So, but when the council changed 2 years ago, because of my business background, then the rest of the council, that's not necessarily what their strengths lie. So I run the $205 million budget that the city of Little Falls runs. And so I help kind of move that through the council and make sure that how we decide about levy increases and all that. So it's really come in handy, to be honest, for me. But I don't think you need any special training, because the great news with city and state legislature is there's lots of smart folks there in our state government and in our city government, and they're always going to listen. They're always going to try to help the elected officials, because we're the policymakers, and they need to influence us, or we need to influence them, right? So at some point, we got to come into alignment. And so they really have an open door to you. And if you have an ability to learn, then you're going to really enjoy public life no matter what. Because it's one of the greatest things is knowing more. I just have more knowledge because I've been involved in state or city government.
And then, real quick, could you tell us which city council seats are up for election this year?
Yeah, so 1, 3, and 5 are up for this 2019. I think the deadline's in September.
September 6th, I believe it's on the sheet, but I believe it's September 6th.
So I'm seat 5, Michelle Zildingman's 3, and Tom Halley's 1. And no one really knows if Tom's running or not. I think Michelle and I are pretty clearly going to run. So and I don't want to discourage anyone from running, even if you're going to run against me, that's fine. But because the great news is if you win and beat me, then I have a lot of free time. There's no downside to losing in public service. But I would say 1, 3, and 5 on the city council. The one that I don't know if anyone signed up for was the auditorium district chair. And I think that sign up has come and gone, but that would have been a fun.
Yeah, auditorium district is passed.
Yeah.
And we had talked about it at one of our meetings, but trying to figure out exactly which seat and where was difficult.
The auditorium
Even though
district.
I asked the office many times.
Yes. The auditorium district's interesting.
How long is the term?
So we're 4 years on the city council. So I was elected in 2015, and I have to run 2019. So So 4-year terms. I will tell you that Congressman Simpson said, hey, you know, if you want a political life, don't stay in one position too long sometimes, because you can make a lot of people angry when you sit in the county commission or city council. We have to make hard decisions, like half the gym, right? Like there's gonna people that don't agree with what you say, and in city government, that's often neighborhood issues or street issues, and George, planning and zoning, you've been through some tough meetings.
Your friends are there looking at you.
That's right. I've had to make some tough motions with people sitting in the audience that's not going to like me anymore. I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure they still like me. Anyway, so 4-year terms for the city council, and 2 years for this legislature. And but I will say one thing about that. I feel fortunate to have been on the council and not in the legislature initially, because the legislature is so, like, you go over there for 3 months and it's 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and there's lobbyists. You lived it, and you can talk about it. But here on the council, I stay here, and everything's spread out all year long, right? So every other week I have meetings, but we have meetings all the time. But it's always here, right? So I can go home and stay with my family. And, so I think if you have a young family, city council is a bit more inviting in some ways than the legislature. But I think it depends on circumstances. All right, thank you.
All right, Jerry, go ahead. We'll go ahead and have Jerry Shively, who served on a school board and also the state legislature. So he'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here. It's great to be a Democrat. I love that. And, I'll give you a little background. First of all, I taught 5 years in the junior highs and 17 years at Skyline High School, and then I was a music coordinator of School District 91 for 16 years. So I have quite a few people out there that I have contacted over the 38 years that I was involved in education. I decided to run for the school board. I retired in '99. Then I decided that I should run for the school board because I could have some effect on what happens to teachers, having been one. And I don't know if I had any effect or not. It's most of what happens at the state level and comes down to the school board to say, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to handle things that way. But there are a lot of things that you do. And I was on the school board at the turn of the century, so I had to think and write down some of the things that we got involved with as a school board. So I'll refer to my notes here. When I was running, the council of the school district said, well, you know, I don't know if it's legal for you to run for the school board, having been a teacher. Oh, yeah? So I said, well, what's that all about? He said, well, you are drawing public employee retirement, and you'll be dealing with issues of the teachers who are going to draw public employment. Fortunately, one of my teaching friends from Pocatello had been on the school board down there. So I talked to him and said, well, what about this? He says, oh, that's bullshit. Go ahead and run. So I went ahead and run, and it was interesting because I was running against one of my former students at Skyline High School, Alan Reed. And Alan Reed is a fine person, and I think was doing a good job on the school board. I just thought maybe we need somebody from the education field on the school board to kind of talk about what goes on in the classroom. So that's basically my premises for running. And I got elected, and Alan was very gracious. He when he talked about it, he said, I was in Mr. Shively's class, and he was good for me at the time I was there, and I really appreciated him, and blah, blah, blah. And so that was kind of confirming, and also he was in my wife's class at New Sweden Elementary School, so he had quite a connection. By the way, the lieutenant governor sitting in our state right now was in my class also. I won't talk about that. So, anyway, you run across some interesting things. Of course, the budget is the biggest and most talked about thing that you deal with, and you have to decide, okay, what portion goes to teacher salaries, what goes to running the school district, and so on. And that's a tough position, because really the school board at that time was very convinced that the teachers are education. And there was never anything that nobody said, well, we should pay them less. They wanted to give the teachers as much as good. So I didn't have any problems in that situation. They run levies. They decide how much we're going to run for levies, whether it's operations or whether it's maintenance of the buildings or building new buildings. That's always a big issue, and how much will people support, and we found out that people don't support a few things that, in my humble opinion, they sure as hell should. One of the toughest decisions that I was involved with was we shut down 2 schools. We shut down Osgood, which had 1 class per grade level, and we shut down Emerson Elementary, which had 1 class per grade level. And that's pretty obvious financially when you look at it. Because if you've got 1 principal for 6 classes or 1 principal for 18 classes, which is the most efficient? Well, that's it was really hard though, sitting there and having people from those schools say, why are you shutting down my school? And at that time, the administration encouraged us to go to what they call a 3-by school, 3 classes in each grade level, and so that's what we were moving towards, and we did save money by closing those schools, but I understand how those people felt. I was really compassionate about that, and that was a tough vote. Negotiate contracts. Actually, we basically on the school board decide what we can afford, and then we have different people, different administrators and so forth, do the negotiations of the contracts from the school board's position. And so we don't get directly involved in negotiations, but in the background, the board has to finalize and say, yep, we agree, that's a reasonable negotiations, and we'll go ahead with it, or we can't afford that, and we've got to do something else. So that's it. Hire and fire employees. I mean, that comes to the board with a recommendation from administrators. The board doesn't go out evaluate teachers. The principals do that job, and one of the crazy things that, not crazy, it was just the way it happened. There was a teacher who really wasn't pulling their weight, and it was no secret. Everybody around figured that and agreed with it. So the board told the principal to notate all of the things that were happening, and this was a 2-year process, and everybody was in agreement that this should happen. This teacher should not be teaching the students. So it came back to the board, time to fire this teacher. Had all of the evidence and everything. But one of the board members was in the same church with the guy that we were trying to fire, and he said, this guy has a family and he has 4 kids, and I said, well, what about the 25 or 27 students in the class? What are we hiring this teacher for? Are we hiring him to draw a salary so he can feed his family, or are we hiring him to teach students? And the board went with keeping the teacher there. And that was one of the disappointing things to me. And it put the principal in a hell of a shape, or a hell of a position, because that principal had worked for 2 years to set this up so it would be legal and everything. So you run into these things and you just deal with them. That's part of what you deal with as a board. You deal with student travel. They have to okay anytime a choir is going someplace, or the athletics, they lay out all of that kind of stuff and okay that. We look at new software when stuff is outdated and you have to buy it. Why, the board approves that. Obviously, a lot of other people do the background work, but the board has replace equipment. Got into a water conservation agreement with the city of Idaho Falls, and that's part of when they dug that big hole behind Idaho Falls High School. And so you get into agreements with the city, and it's a very interesting field, really, to sit there. College readiness plan, the bus schedules, the school calendar, snow closures, attendance policy, and all that kind of stuff. So it's don't be afraid of it. I mean, it's just part of what you do. I thought that might be a bit interesting. So after being on the school board, we used to get these dictates from the state that you'll do this. So I thought, hell, I don't have as much influence here as I'd like to have. So I decided to run for the state legislature. Years earlier, a friend, John Hanson, who had been in the legislature for quite a long time, had encouraged me to run for the legislature, and he said, I'm going to retire. He said, I'll just hand all of this stuff to you, and I've got everything all set up. If you'd like to run for my position, that would be great. But at that time, I was still music coordinator, and there was no way I could take 3 months off of that position to go to Boise. So I had to pass that up. And he was a Republican, but they called him a rhino. He was one of the rhinos. He said, it's crazy as hell, because if you look at my voting record, I voted with the Republican Party probably 90, I don't remember what the percentage was, but I think there were only 6 bills that year that he voted against what the Republicans said he should have voted for. So he was a rhino, but he and his brother Reed Hansen managed to survive that and be elected and continued being elected. So my political career then, I decided that I would run on the Democratic Party, and John actually encouraged me to run on the Republican Party, and he says, after the primaries you're done. He said, then you can relax if you win that. But I was running against Jack Bearcloth, who had been in the Republican Party for many years, and he was a chairman of the Education Committee in Boise, in the legislature. So I was running against him, and that was a tough decision. But as I was knock on the doors, every once in a while somebody would say, he's been there long enough. You know, and so that was really encouraging. I knocked on 7,000 doors that year, and talked to people, and I back up John, you know, 100%. It's really fun to, I don't know, fun, but it's interesting to knock on the doors and talk to people. And the best thing you can do is, you know, introduce yourself and go from that through a few basics, and then say, what do you think is happening? You know, what would you change in the legislature? And most of the time you find something with those people that you can agree with, and agreement is pretty good. One of the funny things that happened, I got a phone call one day. I was out knocking on doors and distributing literature and so forth, and the guy says, "Come over here and get that crap off of my doorstep." You know, and the guy had called the cops because somebody had put this stuff on his doorstep. And so I went over there, and there was one of my flyers right outside his door on the pavement. So I picked it up, went on my way. That's every once in a while you find something like that you say, God, so what? But it's a very interesting thing, and I got over to the legislature, and I was elected, and I was on the education committee, which is where I wanted to be. And Jack Bearcloth came over to Boise, and so he stepped into the committee meeting, the education committee meeting, and the new chairman recognized him and said, "Jack, would you like to say anything?" And I was sitting like here, and he was standing like here, and he talked about what a terrible campaign was run against him, and how the teacher did this and all, and I just sat there and smiled. I thought, you son of a bitch. and
Bad loser.
thought even a little worse than that. He was standing there, and I thought, in a good position. I should have nailed him. But we got through that, and afterwards, after he left, boy, people apologized to me. I mean, he didn't win any points there at that, and so carry yourself with good conduct, you know, and be yourself, be who you are if you're going to run, and it's a good adventure, and I just backing up John's statements previously here. It's good to be where you are, even if you don't win. You throw some some ideas out there that they're going to have to grapple with. And I think that's part of our job. That's part of our job to be out there and step on their toes a bit and make them realize that there are other opinions other than theirs. Do you have, if there are any questions, I'd be glad to.
Just real quick, just so you know that this year in 91, zones 3, 4, and 5 are up, and in 93, zones 1 and 4 are up. There is there on the right-hand side.
Zone for what?
For re-election for school board. Sorry, for school board. So you can see there's a map over there with 91 and 93 and where their zones are. So you can see if you live in one of those zones, if you're interested. What?
Do you have to live in the zone?
You do have to live in a zone for school district. And they did, just so you know, they did move school board elections to the general election. So now they are in November and not in May. So they're bringing that kind of in line with general elections. And then the state legislature is every 2 years. And you can run for a seat that's in your district, and you can choose either A or B, it doesn't matter. So anyway, sorry. Anybody have questions for Jerry?
Oh, one last thing I thought about is that years ago we passed an election and said that we should have legislators no more than 4 years. It was a term limits, and we voted on it and passed it, and then the legislature said no, that's not right, in their wisdom. But I would, having been there, I would say that 4 years is way short. It really is. The first 2 years, which is all they allowed me to be there, was really a learning curve. I'll tell you, it is drinking from a fire hose. Just to learn how to do things, it took the 2 years to get that going. And then I wasn't elected, so. But we came real close the next 2 times, about 48%, but we just couldn't quite get over the top there. But we can. I had hoped that was breaking the crystal and we would get more Democrats elected from this area. And I still think we can, and I think the seed was planted that it's okay to have a Democrat over there. And it may take a few more years for that seed to grow, but I think we're making progress.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a question from Pat?
I do. Jerry, I was wondering about your approach when talking with people, when you're knocking on doors, when you were speaking at events. Were you, because there are 2 schools of thought, should you as a Democrat immediately identify yourself as a Democrat, or should you not talk about that to make a relationship first and then reveal that you're a Democrat? How would you respond to that? And what did you find to be the more successful route? It was a big topic of discussion in my campaign.
Yeah, there were times I got criticized by a Republican, of course, for not putting Democrat on my signs. But I thought, what the hell, are you voting for the party or are you voting for the person? You know, I wish we didn't have anything on any of the signs. But when I knocked on the doors, I said, hi, I'm Jerry Shively, and I'm running for the state legislature on the Democratic Party. I just laid it right out there, and then I said, I'm running because, you know, I don't think we are being represented the way we should be in Boise. And then I'd throw out just a couple of things and then say, and I would ask them, you know, what do you think, and are there issues that you have that should be brought up with the legislature? That's the way I presented it. Yeah.
Any other questions for Jerry? Thank you, Jerry. All right, and now
Did you say you knocked on 7,000 doors?
Yes.
That's incredible. It's
Well,
that's quite an achievement.
Well, I waited till I retired to do this. So I had time. Every day they advised that you don't knock on the doors till about 4 o'clock. And so I did that, and that's,
Still quite a number.
yeah, it was.
That's amazing.
I started early and I went late.
So, Miranda asked me to speak about running for county commissioner, and I decided to break my talk up into 2 sections. First, we're just going to talk about some general qualification things that the legislature's come up with, the 30,000 foot view, so to speak, and then I'll talk about what it was really like to run for county commissioner. This horrible map that you see on the wall, I made that for this meeting because I've been curious after having been to an Idaho Association of Counties meeting over in Boise and rubbing elbows with that crowd, what really is the landscape statewide with county commissions. And this is it, what you see. In the state of Idaho, county commissions by statute can be either 3, 5, or 7 members. Every single county in the state has gone with a 3-member county commission, even though there is a statutory provision for 5 and 7-member commissions. So with 3-member commissions, all the red, heavy red you see here are solid Republican county commissions, the 3-headed monster, so to speak. The ones that are kind of pink have 1 Dem on the board. It's 2 Republicans and 1 Dem. The baby blue ones, which includes Teton County, my county, have 2 Dems and 1 Republican. And then the solid dark blue are all Dems. And you can see how those numbers add up. 116 Republican commissioners in the state of Idaho to 16 Democrats. I'm sure we can make that better. Can we go to the next slide? Each county is divided into 3 districts, and the county commissioners themselves get to decide how to draw the lines and where these boundaries are going to be. And it's obviously going to be different in each county. And this is my county, and Driggs basically is a district in green, Victor is a district in brown, and then the whole rural part of the county is that light yellow color, and that's my district. That's District 3. District 1 is in brown, District 2 is in green, and District 3 is in yellow. So if you could jump forward 2, please. I had to make this map. This came from, Bonneville County has a horrible GIS service, by the way. That map started out looking like this map over here on this wall, which is someone in their infinite wisdom decided to make a combination map, legislative district, precincts, and county commissioners all in one map. You can't read the commissioner districts worth a damn.
And just so you know, we do have a district, Bonneville County District 1 that's bigger over here that's just the county commission districts as well.
So this is what's provided on the county website, and I've colored it up to make it a little easier to understand. It's still pretty convoluted boundaries. The way these districts work, you have to live in your district, but then you don't run in your district, you run county-wide. Everybody in the county votes for every county commissioner. So that previous map that I showed you, I live in District 3. But everybody in all 3 districts votes for me, is how that works. Another very strange thing, Idaho County Commissioners, 2 of the 3 commissioners are up for every election. This next election, you're going to have Districts 1 and Districts 2 up for election. And 1 commissioner gets to sit out. And in this next election, District 3 gets to sit out, and that's me. So I have a 4-year term. I'm not going to be running next year, but both of the other commissioners on my board will. District 1 next year will be running for a 4-year term. District 2 will be running for a 2-year term.
And that's the same across the whole state.
And that's the same across the whole state. In every county, it's like that.
So we'll have District 1, which is Christensen, for a running for a 4-year term next year.
Right.
And we'll have District 2, which is Radford,
Right.
running for a 2-year term.
Correct.
So keep that in mind if you're considering county commission.
And
Does each district alternate?
Yes.
2-year?
Each district alternates, so I was just elected to a 4-year term. If I run for re-election at the end of that 4-year term, I will be running for a 2-year term. And it goes back and forth like a seesaw into infinity like that.
And just so you know, county commission is not listed on those sheets you have, so if you want to make a note of that, because the county office actually, I've been badgering them for information about zones and when they're up for election, and they have not been able to tell me at the county elections office. So Bob has been great because now we know.
Yeah. So
This is what's referred to as Idaho logic?
yeah. So on this map, we're kind of zoomed in on Idaho Falls and Ammon, and you can see that they've zigzagged the boundaries of these districts in an almost incomprehensible way.
You can see it really well
It-
here.
if you could see it really well up there, if you walk up there with a magnifying glass, I would advise anyone who's considering running for county commissioner in this county to get on that website and download that map and zoom in and understand clearly what district do you live in. Because I don't think it's a straightforward, easy to understand thing. It doesn't look that way to me. At any rate, could we go to that last slide? I had to extrapolate this from the previous slide because they don't have a countywide map anywhere on the county website. I think this is right, and it bears out to be pretty accurate looking at the map over on the wall there as to where these districts are. So District 1, the brown district, is up next year, and District 2, the green district, is up next year. If you happen to live in District 3, which is the yellow district, you can't run next year. That one's going to sit out. But whichever district you do run for, you are running a county-wide strategy. You're going to have to campaign everywhere. Swan Valley, everything. So, to get into my own campaign, I'm going to hand out my door knockers.
Here, Bob, I'll take them.
Would you do these? Thanks. So I was first approached to run for county commissioner probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I was really at the height of my career at that point and declined. But it planted the seed in the back of my mind that maybe that was something I would like to do. So in 2016, I was approached again, would I consider running for county commissioner? And that time I was dumb enough to say yes. I lost. It was a really gratifying experience. I learned a ton by doing it. My opponent was a guy named Mark Ricks. And for those of you who haven't lived in eastern Idaho very long, if you're running against somebody named Ricks, it's like running in Virginia against somebody named Washington. It's a very difficult hill to climb. But I did manage to get better name recognition out of that, I guess. After the election in 2016, I lost by 5%, so it was like 52.5% to 47.5%, which isn't too bad. And a year later, I retired from my career. I was an architect for many years. I did mostly publicly funded projects, schools and hospitals and courthouses and things like that. And I was asked again if I might be interested in running again. And I said no. I kind of felt that there was a taint on me because I had lost. And there were so many other people that wanted to run. I said, let somebody else run and I'll be their campaign manager. And we kind of left it like that for a while. And a guy did step forward who said he would run. And we got through the Christmas holiday and into January of 18. And he changed his mind. He decided he didn't want to run after all. And no one else stepped forward. And I just said, okay, I'll do it. Because at that point I was retired. I had more time to put into it. And thought I knew better what I was getting into. And the rest is history. This time I won. My opponent was the same guy. It was Mark Ricks. And managed to flip the whole thing to where I won by 7%.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a 12% swing. Here's some books. I'm just going to pass through the room. I'll put one in each row. And those books have been recommended to me. My favorite is called The Wellstone Method. It's the one that's got a blue and green cover on it. There's one going around by Nancy Pelosi's daughter in this front row, which is a good book, but it's focused a little more on national politics. The Wellstone book is more on local politics, which is what we're talking about. The last book that I have going around is called Voicing Your Values, and it discusses how to frame an argument. We lefties tend to frame arguments in an intellectual way. We want to convince each other, with a rational argument of why you should agree with me. And that's not really how people tick. And it helps you reframe an argument in ways that everybody can understand. And I found that book very useful. There is no magic bullet to run in a campaign, but probably the most magic is knocking on doors for sure. Knocking on 7,000 doors, that blows my mind. I ended up knocking on probably 1,200 doors, and that was a pretty dedicated knocking routine. My routine was I was out every Tuesday evening, Thursday evening, and Saturday day, and didn't want to impinge on anybody's dinner times or anything like that. Frequently would knock on a door, somebody would come, and I'd say, I'm Bob Hennig, I'm running for county commissioner, and I'd like to know what your concerns are with the county, what you think needs to be changed, what you think needs to be adjusted, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. And then I just step back and listen. That works 90% of the time. People do have opinions, and they're usually happy to share them with you. And if somebody's willing to stand there and listen, that's you've made a friend. From time to time, people would say, "You Democrat or you Republican?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm running as a Democrat." "Well, I'm a Republican." I said, "Okay, can we talk about a couple of individual issues?" And, okay. Let's talk about affordable housing. Let's talk about some land use issues. And usually about 3 to 5 minutes into that conversation, they would be really shocked to discover that maybe you and they had more in common than they thought. The image that's being painted up by right-wing radio and things like that is that we are just two completely opposed armed camps. We have nothing in common. We have no overlapping interests. We don't even care about each other. And it's just not really so. If you could communicate with people about issues rather than party, it was way more useful, I think. Easier to connect. Got a few notes here. Excuse me. This is my detailed battle plan, which I'm not going to totally get into, but there's a few little pearls in here. Well, first off, budget-wise, I ended up raising about $16,000.
And just,
Go ahead.
would you be willing, if somebody wanted you to send them that information, if they want
No.
to come? No?
No.
Okay. No, okay, good call.
If somebody wants to run for county commissioner, I will sit down with you and walk you through the whole thing in great detail. I'll put a ton of energy into your campaign. I don't know which of you that's going to be, but I'd be happy to do that. But I don't want to just do this in wide dissemination,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yep, that makes sense.
I
was going to ask if they could get in touch, if they could come to me and get in touch with you.
Absolutely, please do. You have to develop a good campaign plan, and I think your number one decision is a campaign manager. A third of my entire budget went into paying my campaign manager. Having somebody on staff that's willing to work hard and is focused makes all the difference in the world.
Bob?
Yeah.
What do you look for in the campaign manager?
Somebody who's willing to work for cheap. Somebody who's really focused. So my campaign manager the first time around was also the chair of the party. She had a full-time job. She was very dedicated. She understood the workings of the Democratic Party really well. And she did a good job, but we ended up losing. The second time around, I looked for different qualities. There was a gal who was one of the main movers and shakers behind the Women's March, which took place just 2 or 3 months after Trump was elected. And we had a pretty dynamic, high-energy Women's March up in Driggs through the snow. And she was literally, I picked her out of the crowd because she was the one that was screaming the loudest. And I went and took her out for coffee. She's a young gal, she's 25 years old. She's really, really super smart. She is the new physics teacher at Teton High School, so she's a scientist. And she was highly motivated and just really fired up. And that kind of emotion and dedication is irreplaceable. She was great. Local issues only. When you're knocking on doors, everybody wants to talk about Trump. You know, if you can't get away from it, you'll have to do it. But I would do everything I could to try and pivot the conversation back to local issues. I'm here to talk about land use. I'm here to talk about affordable housing. I'm here to talk about education, things like that. But I don't really want to talk about Boise much, and I sure don't want to talk about Washington. Fundraising plan, you spend a lot of time on the phone asking people for money. There's just no getting around it. Running for office is expensive. I raised about $16,000. We spent every penny of it, and my campaign manager and I sat down and decided very carefully exactly where we're going to allocate those dollars every week by week, because dollars were precious. As I said, the lion's share of my budget went to paying my campaign manager, but we spent 12% on print advertising in Jackson, 14% on print advertising in Driggs, 5% on radio, 12% doing a mass mailing around Teton County, rent. We made some t-shirts, postage, door hangers, the things that I just handed around. It was not really focused on any one particular thing, with the exception of my campaign manager. Volunteers. So when you're going around knocking doors, it really helps to have somebody with you that knows the neighborhood. And when you're knocking on that door, hopefully they know or at least slightly acquainted with the house that you're knocking on. Because having that intel of what kind of a situation you're walking into when you're walking up that driveway, it's really invaluable. That boils down to your precincts and precinct captains. I did notice, looking at Bonneville precinct captains, the Republicans have somebody in every single precinct in Bonneville County in that position. The Dems, not so much. You've got like 18 out of 59 precincts covered. That's only a third. And
More than we've ever had before.
okay, I'll give you credit, but
No, we do need more. And
anything, if you're
captain, come talk to me.
anything like how we were in Teton County, the precinct captains are the backbone of your party. That's how you're going to reach down to the grassroots. Those people understand their own neighborhoods. And if you're not fired up enough to want to run for county commissioner or city councilor or what have you, please do consider running for precinct captain. It's a lower level of commitment for sure, but it's crucially important. And the people that are running for office can work closely with you. The precinct captains are reaching up to deal with the candidates, and they're reaching down to deal with neighborhood captains. Long story short, if I was going to go out on a Tuesday night and knock doors, and I knew I wanted to go to precinct 7, I'd look up on the list, who's the precinct captain, precinct 7. I'd call her up and have a chat. You know, are you available to go out and knock doors with me? And if you're not, can you put me in touch with someone who will? And it always worked. If the precinct captain personally couldn't do it, they would put me in touch with who could. And so every time I went out and knocked doors, I was walking with someone that was from that neighborhood. Made a huge difference. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to try and develop your precincts and get somebody in that position in as many precincts as you possibly can. And that's not just for running for county commissioner, that's running for anything. But at the county level, it's crucial. The party and Conservation Voters for Idaho do some trainings over in Boise in the spring and summer of election year. So not this year, although I know that city elections are this year. Next year for county elections, and next year's going to be a presidential election again too. So it's going to be crazy time again. Those trainings are really great over in Boise. If you think you might want to run for office, please do go over there and sit in on some of those seminars. They bring in people from around the country who know a lot about what it's like to run for office, and they can give you a lot of valuable advice. I don't know, it's a multi-headed thing for us. We didn't focus too much. I mean, as I said, again, the magic bullet is knocking on doors. But outside of that, we tried to really spread out how we were doing advertising in a whole variety of ways. I'm not sure what else to tell you at this point. Can I take any questions?
What does a county commissioner do?
So a county commissioner is like one head on a hydra. There are 3 county commissioners, and you are not allowed to make any decisions by yourself. You have to convene as a board, and as a 3-member board, you can address issues in the county in much similar fashion to the way city council deals with things in the city. Our jurisdiction starts right when the city ends. So we don't deal with the city of Driggs, we don't deal with the city of Victor, but we deal with the whole rest of the county. Mostly it's land use issues. In Teton County, we had a crazy land boom about 12 to 15 years ago, and we subdivided, I think, 7,000 new lots over about a 4-year period. So when you go up in the mountains and look down into the valley these days, it's just a network of cul-de-sacs everywhere you can see. And people's views are getting threatened. The whole character of the valley became threatened. We're turning into suburbia, and a lot of people didn't move there because they wanted to be in a suburban environment. They wanted to be in kind of a countrified environment. So as we develop, and as we get more people in there, how do we develop? Do we sell 10-acre ranchettes and just cover the whole valley floor? A lot of the people whose families go back 5 generations think that's a good way to do it. It's really not a good way to do it. If we can cluster development so that we keep view sheds open, one of the most important things about the Yellowstone ecosystem is the large wildlife that we have here, the megafauna. And as we can accommodate them and their migration patterns and all of that without just developing everything from national forest to national forest, that's a better development pattern. So as developers come in there and propose new subdivisions or new commercial projects on the highway, Highway 33 is getting longer, the commercial strip is getting longer every year. So when you're driving down the highway, you glance over, you're not getting a view of the Tetons anymore, you're getting a view of a Maverick station. Is that the future we want? And people get really emotional about that. Did I answer your question?
So mostly you deal with like issues of like land use.
Land use is a big thing. Creating an environment for affordable housing to be able to happen. We can do that by manipulating the tax code, manipulating building permits, things like that.
Do you set like tax rates for the county, or is that part of what you do, or is that something else?
We do set tax rates for the county. We're very limited by the state because the state supremacy rule. In, I think it was 1985, the state decided that you could only raise taxes by 3% per year. which, yeah, it sounds great, but if you're growing at the rate in your county of like 7% per year, which we have been, you're falling behind at 4% per year. How do you reallocate funds to pay for everything?
So what role do county commissioners play in economic development issues?
To the extent we can, you create an environment where people want to, we would like to diversify the economy to the extent that we can. Very much right now, it's about tourism. If we can get some light manufacturing in there, people come in and do a pitch on a project. It just depends on where you want to put them and can you accommodate that.
So basically, you decide some of that zoning and land issue stuff out of the county, when it's stuff that's not maybe incorporated in the city?
Right.
Does your county commission board also have oversight on healthcare issues, health funding, and like our county does, or jails?
Jails, no. In Teton County, we are shipping all of our prisoners to Madison County, which has financially worked out better for us. Building and operating a jail are very expensive propositions. We just don't have enough bad guys to really justify a jail. What was the other half of that?
Health.
Oh, we do provide some funding for the hospital. Yeah.
You operate a cap fund?
I'm sorry?
You operate a cap fund, right?
What's a cap fund?
Catastrophic.
Oh, yeah. For indigent? Yeah.
So this is going back to your campaign.
Sure.
A 12% swing is significant, to put it diplomatically, especially
Yeah.
as you said, since you were running against what is essentially a dynastic
Right.
name in politics.
Right.
And I understand that overall this answer is probably going to be more complex than you can give, but are there one or two things that stick out that made a huge difference in what you did and what you didn't do in the general political climate?
We did a little bit more of everything. I raised and spent a little more money. I definitely knocked on a significantly higher number of doors. I started my campaign actively earlier. I think the first time I ran, we really started running late July, and this time I started running the middle of June. It was just an earlier start with more funds and working harder. Also, I wasn't working anymore. I had retired. I was still working full time when I ran that first campaign, which enabled me to campaign probably 20 hours a week. As a retired guy, I could devote my every waking hour to the campaign. I probably didn't quite do that, but it was definitely more time and more money.
Okay.
How and who determines the districts within a county?
The county commissioners determine their own districts.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Is that renegotiated every?
I think it's done after every census. So we'll have a census again next year. And in 2021 or 22, they'll be redrawing all these boundaries. And since
It's based on population then, and there's an equal.
Yes.
there's
Yep. Since you bring that up, I'd also like to mention that state legislative boundaries will be getting redrawn at the same time. In Teton County, our party has become very focused on local elections. The commissioner races, clerk, treasurer, sheriff, prosecutor, all that stuff. And we've had a pretty good degree of success on those. We have been gerrymandered into a legislative district that stretches all the way from the Montana border to the Utah border, along the Wyoming line. And Teton is in with like Swan Valley and Bone, and then Caribou County, Franklin County. So if you want to run for legislature and you're from, say, Tetonia, you have to be able to drive down to Soda Springs and Preston and places like that. You literally have to leave the district and get on the freeway and drive down to Pocatello and then re-enter the district from the south.
Oh my God.
So we've essentially been disenfranchised as far as the legislature goes, and that's made us focus on local stuff. Yeah.
That's exactly why it's most critical to get more Democrats elected to statewide office next year.
Yep.
So they can contribute to getting those districts redrawn. Even though we have in the state, don't we have a board that does that?
Yes.
But I do think you guys can get at least one, maybe two people elected to your own county commission here in Bonneville County. You were talking about a dynastic effect. I think Roger's been in there since 1994. What is that, 27 years?
Yeah.
Long time. And Radford's been in there for, I think, 2004.
Long time.
Also a very long time. When you've been in there a long time, you got some skeletons in your closet. I think if somebody were to really roll up their sleeves and give this a big gung-ho effort, one of those guys could certainly be picked off.
Any other questions for Bob? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, oh, yes.
A takeaway that I'm getting from this, a takeaway that I'm hearing here from all the candidates, the longer your opponent has been in office, the more debris they've gathered, the better opportunity you have to knock them off. Run.
One last point I'd like to make. I'm sorry. This is
Oh, that's okay. I'll give me time to finish my pizza.
It's okay. So that map that was on the wall for an hour or so, we don't need to put it back up. You know that most of it was solid red. The reason that they're all solid red, these guys are running unopposed in the fall. They're running in the Republican primary, and the Republican primary is essentially the general election as far as they're concerned, because there aren't any Dems opposing them. So if you have half a mind to do it, if you just put up an opponent for these guys and work at it, you got a real good chance of taking them on. These guys don't even know how to run anymore because they never had to. They don't compete in general elections because no one ever gives them a run for their money. They don't know how to campaign. So you do have a good chance.
What?
I just wanted to reiterate again, if you're confused about what county commissioner, what school board, et cetera, if you go to the Secretary of State's office and look up on voter information and look up your name, it'll give you every, including the cemetery districts, it'll give you every district that you're in.
I tried finding it well, you can't.
And the judges.
Yeah, well, but if you go to the Secretary of State's office, it's there with your voter
It's a good
registration.
idea.
What does the cemetery district person do?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's.
Soil district, same thing.
Yeah, so from what I can tell, it's most of those, like the really small subdivided ones are really more about making sure that, like for cemetery district, making sure the right funds are allocated for like maintenance and repairs and upkeep in those districts, and then making sure that they're not falling into disrepair and working on that kind of stuff. So most of those things are kind of we've got the tax dollars, how do we allocate them in a way that makes sure things have been maintained and are doing the upkeep. And yeah, and I couldn't find anybody who was on a soil conservation or cemetery district to come speak with us today. But those are, but it is important to note that, auditorium district, next year in 2020, there will be trustee zones for the College of Eastern Idaho up for election. And I've been trying to get a map of the trustee zones for CEI. It's been a long, hard attempt, but we're still working on it. But there will be zones for CEI, trustee zones up for election in 2020. And one thing we have to remember is, there are no off years. We like to talk about things in terms of off years and on years, but there are no off years. We are always citizens, we're always voting for something, and we should always be engaged and ready to step up. And one of the things that I personally have been really trying to talk about since I've been chair is the importance of the local and the importance of, are we on school boards? Are we on city councils? Are we on county commission? Are we working for that? Because there is more than just the state legislature. So, and these are home things, and when we know that there are folks who are planning on running for school board. I think Jim is planning on running for school board this year. Yay! And we have Cecile, who ran for school board last time around, so yay! And then, of course, we have Pat and George and Jim, who all ran for state legislature last time around. Yay! So the importance of continuing, and then of course, and I almost forgot about Robert, who also ran for state legislature. Yay!
And is running
And
again.
is planning on running again. So if you want to run for office, don't wait until next year. Start thinking about it now, and start, thinking about how we can do those resources, how we can help you with those resources. I know we will be having a candidate training later this year, so put your name on the sheet so that you can get information about when we have a candidate training. And Dave, you had a question or comment?
I think a critically important part of Bob's comments that need a little bit more emphasis is the vital role that precinct captains play in our ability to have and launch successful campaigns. So that infrastructure played a big role. His ability to pick up a phone when he's headed out to a certain neighborhood or area and say, "Hey, Mr. or Miss Precinct Captain, are you available? Or if you're not, who is?" That's huge. So even if you're not considering putting yourself out there for public office, those precinct captain roles are hugely significant. And I think building the infrastructure of our local county is just as important, if not more so.
Oh yeah, definitely. And we'll be having a precinct captain training again later this year. So, yes, McKay.
I was gonna actually add, I think precinct captain and party officer positions are technically,
They are public office.
they are public office. There is an election that is held every 2 years. Every 2 years.
In
So,
May.
but we can
it is in May.
appoint. Yeah, so in 2020 there'll be another precinct election for precinct captains.
Yeah.
But if you would like to be a precinct captain before 2020,
Right.
come talk to me.
It's like it's a
There's-
super.
There's a pretty good chance that the precinct's open. So come talk to me. We can get you appointed.
It's a super easy way to dip your toe into the political system and running for office and stuff like
A
that.
lot of fun.
Yeah.
I kind of have a question for Bob and you too, Miranda. You were talking about you went to your precinct. How many people are in a precinct in Teton County? Is it the same in every county?
Well, in Teton County, I think it represents 900 voters, registered voters.
The reason I was asking is because, I'm precinct captain for 26, and there's a whole lot more people.
Yes.
Than 900.
Well, it's not people, it's registered voters.
Registered voters, but there's a lot more.
Okay.
Just one announcement for people that live in District 91. Right now, there's a page on the District 91 website that directs you to a survey. They're looking for citizens' interest in how they want to set the next 10 years of planning. And I actually sat at a table at the meeting on Tuesday and had an argument about whether or not STEM was more important than athletics, and I lost.
Ooh.
So if you're interested in giving your opinion to the district and you live in District 91, please get on the District 91 webpage and
Yeah.
express your opinions.
Yeah, and I am on the steering committee for that, because I hate myself. But I am on the steering committee for that. So, but yeah, and there'll be another community meeting as well coming up in May, and so keep an eye out for that as well.
The survey's only open until the 17th of
17th.
April.
Right, yeah, so get on there really quickly and take the survey. All right, thank you so much for coming. Remember, if you want Truman Banquet tickets, Pat and John are at the back. If you would like to help us with Truman Banquet planning, please stick around. Help us out with that. Once again, take a look at the maps we have around the room. Figure out what precinct you're in. Figure out what school district zone you're in. Figure out what county commission zone you're in. Figure out if maybe you want to run for office and maybe be a little more involved. And if you don't, please volunteer. So thank you all so much for coming, and see you tonight at 5 p.m. at the Friendship Garden.